as we get halfway through the third season of Ninth Doctor Big Finish audio adventures, we got a reaction to the latest box set that I haven't seen for the Ninth Doctor adventures. We've got Travel in Hope, we've got a trilogy of stories here, Below There by Lauren Mooney and Stuart Pringle, The Butler Did It by James Moran, and Run by Robert Valentine. And the reaction to this box set, from what I saw at least, obviously it depends on what circles you're in and who you follow and who you hang around with and that, the reaction to this box set was not only pretty muted, from what I saw, it actually kind of bordered on quite negative. And for these box sets, I think that there has been a little bit of fatigue with the Ninth Doctor range, because they release like 4 of these every 12 months. They've been quite consistent with this. And of course, this was like a huge novelty 2.5 to 3 years ago, having the Ninth Doctor played by Christopher Eccleston reprising the role. But now that they are like halfway through 3 seasons of this thing, I think that maybe fans are expecting something a little bit more different from these Rangers, because we're not giving him any companions, clearly. He had an opportunity to have a companion in Callan Doyle in Shades of Fear and Pioneers, but they quickly dumped him off on another planet, him and his dog, unfortunately, which is a shame. We've got 3 stories which have the Ninth Doctor companionless, once again. The obligatory returning villain for this story, for this box set, are the Ice Warriors. We've got Alpha Centauri there from the Peladon stories. But with this, we've got 3 stories. Below There, by Lauren Mooney and Stuart Pringle, is essentially Doctor Who's take on the Charles Dickens story, The Signalman. The story follows Vix Leeson, played by Kelly Adams, who is working on a teleport relay station in the vastness of space. It's essentially an extension of TMAT that we've seen established over the course of the classic series. Basically, a big company has bought out TMAT and has expanded it, and she's working at one of the big relay stations. However, she's been having nightmares. Whenever she opens the windows or looks on the viewing platform, she's in space, she's not opening the windows. That's my bad. She sees some strange figures in space staring back over her shoulder, and it's freaking her the hell out. Also freaking her the hell out is a bunch of cryptic and ominous phone calls from a strange northerner who is not letting on what he's doing there. Let's play a clip from Below There.
Is that for me?
Incoming transmission.
Hello?
Vix?
Doctor.
I Spy.
What?
Come on, I Spy. You must have played I Spy. Look, you're bored, I'm bored, sort of. Let's play a game.
I Spy?
Well, it's that or Never Have I Ever, and I just don't know you that well yet.
I Spy with my little eye, something beginning with S.
Is it space? Because that's rubbish.
It is space, yeah.
Terrible. My turn. I Spy.
Look, Doctor, I appreciate the call, but I'm...
Working, I know. What is it you're working on, anyway? You never said.
I can't...
Yes, you can. This channel is encrypted. Oh, hang on. Now it is.
Why, how do I know that?
You'll just have to trust me.
It's nothing exciting. I work for Leap Corps.
Who are?
Well, you haven't heard of Leap Corps. How did you manage that?
I've been travelling.
Sure, but...
Indulge me.
Leap Corps are... teleportation. Transit. The biggest mass teleportation system in the galaxy.
That's TMAT.
Wow, okay, Grandad. Leap Corps bought out TMAT 50 years ago. Snapped up the whole network, expanded it 1,000 times over. And it doesn't just move cargo now, it takes passengers.
What sort of passengers? Military?
And the rest? Billions of passengers use Leap Corps every year to reach any point in the galaxy, any point that the Leap beam can be relayed to. That's what I do. I monitor Leap Node Upsilon Tau.
In the oubliette?
Anywhere they need me. The Leap beam, it's instantaneous. Clean.
Safe?
100% safety record.
So
what?
So why are you afraid, Vix just Vix?
So I had pretty high expectations for this story, because this comes from Lauren Mooney and Stuart Pringle, who have brought us some pretty brilliant Big Finish stories over the past year. They did Black Friday from the Diary of River Song to Rivers on a Firewall set, which was like one of my favourite general stories of last year. And they also did the Dalby Spook with the 8th Doctor last year as well. Some really, really good stories. The two clearly collaborate really, really well with each other. And they've got like just a great sense of fun and adventure. They are really, really well suited to Doctor Who. For Below There, I thought it started very, very strongly, where you've got Vix, who is, you get a lot of exposition from, like, who Vix is and where she's come from based on these video calls that she's making, similar to the Waters of Mars, where you've got these video messages that the crew of Bowery Base 6 are sending and that they're receiving and that they're watching. And so, you know, it's a good avenue for exposition, especially when, you know, she sends a heartfelt message and then decides to delete it halfway through, and then that call is interrupted from the Doctor, who is wanting to play I Spy. And framing the story from Vix's perspective and having the Doctor sort of intrude every so often with these phone calls is actually a pretty novel way to do a Ninth Doctor box set. I think that was a really good starting point for this story. It's really creepy and atmospheric as Vix is having these nightmares. She goes on the viewing platform and she sees these humanoid figures out in space looking past her, which is creepy as hell because she doesn't know if there is actually anything behind her when it's happening. Really cool starting point. The issue is that halfway through Below There, the Doctor lands on the ship. And then all of the interesting lead up, all of the interesting mood setting just kind of gets jettisoned out the airlock. There's a lot on its mind in terms of like privatization of travel companies. Something as intrinsic to the human condition as traveling and witnessing wonders and exploring, that should not be gated by class, you know. And the people who work at these travel companies, who work at this like TMAT successor, they don't earn enough to actually use the transmat beams that they operate and that they're part of the relay for. There's some really interesting class consciousness there that I really appreciated. And I'm sure Christopher Eccleston appreciated as well when recording this. There's also, like I said, the allusions to Charles Dickens' The Signalman, you know, and one of my favourite things in these Big Finish box sets and these stories is when I'm listening to it, I think, oh, this is an awful lot like this story. And then in the behind-the-scenes interviews, they say, yeah, so this was inspired by this story, and I got it exactly right. I'm so well-read, and I'm very, very clever. Yeah, but like I said, with Below There, the issue is that halfway through, it kind of loses all of the interesting mood setting, and it becomes significantly more generic. In terms of its approach to mood, atmosphere, and stakes and stuff like that, it was quite disappointing. And also, there's a twist involving what Vix actually knows is going on the ship that would have really, really worked if this was a visual medium. For example, there's a plot twist involving something that the Doctor notices on the kitchen table, but the audience won't have noticed it because this is not a visual medium. It felt a little bit like a cheat, which was quite, you know, it felt like it took the wind out of the story's sails somewhat. Below There was fine. It starts really strong, like I said, and I think that Kelly Adams does a terrific job in terms of her actual performance, and she's got some good interplay with Christopher Eccleston when they're on the phones with each other, and she carries a lot of the story on her own. I think that she does a really good job, like, monologuing to herself and making it sound credible, and also really instilling the terror and the claustrophobia, despite being on a massive space station on your own. I just don't really think it came together as a whole. However, it's significantly better than The Butler Did It by James Moran. And I love James Moran. I think he's a terrific writer. But I think The Butler Did It is a pretty big miss in terms of the Ninth Doctor box set. But let me explain. So The Butler Did It takes place on a space station repair port. The TARDIS is damaged. The Doctor breaks a lever. It needs repairing. So on this spaceport, he finds an old friend of his who is part of this species where there's only two of them in existence, a male and a female. They mate for life. One of them is killed. One of them is poisoned. So the Ninth Doctor teams up with Mira, played by Emma Swan, to try and interrogate and speak to all of the inhabitants of this spaceport to figure out who did it. Let's play a clip from The Butler Did It.
Right, here's what's going to happen. We'll interview all the suspects, that's you lot. Figure out who has poisoned Sita, get the antidote, lock up the culprit, and graciously accept your applause. But first, my gut feeling is this. The Butler did it. Where's the butler?
This is a spaceship repair port. We don't have a butler.
Right, well, that's my only theory knackered then.
Back it up a bit. Who put you in charge?
Whoever poisoned my friend, that's who. They put me in charge. Making a powerful enemy and a huge mistake. You sure you don't have a butler? It'd make this a lot easier.
Sorry, what exactly is happening?
Murder! Attempted, hopefully, if I have anything to say about it, and I usually do.
Now look, I'm the security chief around here.
Well, not doing a great job of it, are you? What? Someone's been poisoned and you've only just turned up. You didn't notice anything and don't seem to want to do anything apart from give me backchat.
Backchat? I'm this close to locking you up.
You'll do nothing, which is the sum total of what you've done so far. So do us all a favour and button it, mate.
I've got a lot of ship repairs to get through, so...
You can take a seat right there. My friend has been poisoned. Sita and Kiri are the last two Deluvanoids. If Sita dies, then Kiri will be the last of her kind. I am not going to let that happen. Is that nice and crystal clear? Good. Now, we'll take turns to interview you and figure this out. I love a bit of detecting me. Who's first?
Also, I just noticed the cover art of the story says that it was written by Robert Valentine, but the Big Finish page says that The Butler Did It was written by James Moran. So I actually don't know who wrote it now. That's quite confusing. Anyway, so The Butler Did It. It kind of stumbles at the first hurdle here, because the inciting incident is the poisoning of Sita, played by Paul Thornley, who is established in the story to be an old friend of the Doctor's. However, not only has this character never been mentioned before, but I don't even think that the Ninth Doctor and Sita exchange a single line of dialogue to each other before the poisoning happens, and then we're just meant to assume that, okay, these two were actually best friends. But then, if this is meant to be like a personal vengeance story, or at least, like, the Ninth Doctor is personally motivated to figure out who did the poisoning, who killed Sita, then why is he trying to do the whole Butler Did It jokey around, let's have a fun time doing a murder mystery Poirot homage? These aspects of the character aren't properly aligning, and this isn't a case of I'm going to act dumb like the Second Doctor to lull these people into a false sense of security. It just seems like the Ninth Doctor is not taking this personal revenge quest very, very seriously, and I actually think this is one of the few times in these Big Finish stories where I think Christopher Eccleston has kind of like checked out a little bit. He seems a little bit on autopilot, because there's really nothing in The Butler Did It for the Ninth Doctor to sort of like chew on, to sort of work with here. Like, for example, I mentioned up top that Sita and Mira are meant to be like the last of their kind. They mate for life, and there's only two of them in the universe. Sita is killed, meaning that Mira is now the last of her kind. And with the exception of that clip that I played there where he briefly mentions it in a bit of anger there, it never really comes up or gets brought up again. And you'd think that the Ninth Doctor, of all Doctors, the last of the Time Lords, might have something a little bit more to say about wanting to get revenge for somebody who is now the last of their kind. Now, I think that the Doctor and Mira have a fun dynamic with each other, where Mira is not quite as confident or as self-assured as she should be for an investigation, to be a hard-nosed detective like the Doctor wants her to be. However, that dynamic can only really take you so far. And like I said, I don't think that this works really well tonally. I think that the Ninth Doctor's characterization is all kinds of off here. And also, the supporting cast themselves aren't really interesting. They're not well defined. Also, the fact that you've got like 5 or 6 characters on the spaceship here, but they're played by the same 3 actors. There's a lot of multi-rolling going on here, and they sound very similar, meaning there are some scenes where I have no idea, like, who they are, how they relate to each other, who's talking to who. Pretty basic fundamental stuff, and that's like an issue with the casting, not so much the writing. They shouldn't have been multi-rolling so much, and at least in my opinion for this story. I think that The Butler Did It is probably the low point of the Ninth Doctor range. Like, since it's been going on for like 2.5 years, this is a pretty solid miss, in my opinion. This was quite a slog to get through. It's one of the shorter stories in the Ninth Doctor range. It's only like 45 minutes long, but I had to like stop 3 or 4 times over the course of listening to it because I just got distracted by things. I wasn't invested in the characters. I wasn't invested in the mystery or the conflict or anything. This was honestly a bit of a low point for the whole range. The Butler Did It, unfortunately, is not as fun or as smart as it thinks it is, and it is a bit of a letdown, all things considered. And lastly, now, we've got Run by Robert Valentine, which is essentially a political thriller starring the Ninth Doctor acting as the campaign advisor for Alpha Centauri. You remember Alpha Centauri? This creature, this one-eyed creature from the Peladon stories in the classic era, who has recently been played in Big Finish box sets by Jane Goddard, and is also played here once again by Jane Goddard, reprising the role. They were awesome in the Peladon box set the other year. You know this person. They're really cool. It's a great idea for a pairing, the Ninth Doctor and Alpha Centauri. But this is an Alpha Centauri, young, wide-eyed, at the beginning of their political career at the Galactic Federation. It's their very first day, in fact, at the Galactic Federation. And to greet them as they leave their car, as they're getting dropped off outside the Federation, is the Ninth Doctor, acting as an advisor, who will not let Alpha Centauri know who they are. So this is essentially an Alpha Centauri prequel with some Ice Warriors thrown in for good measure. Now, the story revolves around Bellatrix Vega, who is played by Jane Asher, who is essentially a demagogue fascist, who is running a presidential campaign for the Galactic Federation, and has killed their opponent in an assassination job. And because they are the only one who is applying for the role, if nobody else makes their own campaign, their presidential bid known, they automatically become the new president. So the Ninth Doctor, knowing that Bellatrix is going to ruin the universe with her fascism, prompts Alpha Centauri to run against her. Let's play a clip from Run.
Order! Alpha Centauri, is that your true and honest intention?
It is, Speaker. I volunteer.
Speaker of the House! This is ridiculous! This Alpha Centaurian senator's barely out of its pupil stage.
Order!
Senator Tausetti, I may be young and inexperienced, but I am willing to act as placeholder to allow the search for a legitimate candidate to be carried out.
Order! Tausetti, you are not recognized at this time. Unless anyone knows the Constitution better than me, I'm lost for a legal reason the Senator cannot volunteer. Alpha Centauri, you will remove yourself from the chamber so that we may confer upon you the position of presidential candidate.
Well done, AC. I knew you'd do it.
I don't feel very well.
It's a really good pairing, and I'm not going to claim to have like a great memory of the Peladon stories from the early 1970s. I've not watched them for several years, so I'm not quite sure if there are any like Galactic Federation like Easter eggs or references or anything outside of, the surface level stuff like Alpha Centauri, like the Ice Warriors being a part of the Federation as well. They're in this story as well. One of them's voiced by Nicholas Briggs, as is to be expected, and he does a really good job here. So for those of you who don't quite know, in the early 1970s was when the United Kingdom joined what is now known as the European Union, and there was a bit of controversy about that at the time, and this was used as the backdrop for the Curse of Peladon and the Monster of Peladon stories from the early 1970s, and they say that Doctor Who was never political or took inspiration from political events. Ha ha, we have a good laugh here. So what's interesting about Run, though, is how it kind of reassesses the whole like neoliberal ideology of like things like the European Union or liberal democracies in the 21st century, and just how susceptible and fragile they are when you have these outsiders to the system who, take advantage of the fact that these systems are not constructed for people who actively lie and actively wish harm upon those systems. Because liberalism, as we all know, like from the past century of history, is not a very good tool to fight against fascism. It's just not. This has been proven over the course of all of human history. So what we have here with Bellatrix is a character who is of course willing to lie, who is willing to stir up hatred, is willing to do whatever it takes in order to get the vote, because what fascists need to do in order to win is to only get into power once. And that's the backdrop for Run by Robert Valentine, where Bellatrix only needs to get into power once, because once is all they need to tear down democracy and to ruin worlds. Now, I think that Robert Valentine's script is kind of struggling a little bit against like the neoliberal framework of the Galactic Federation, because the moral of the story ultimately for these types of stories with this backdrop is vote harder if you want to win. And you know what, voting is very, very important, and I will tell you folks to vote if there is something coming up. I mean, you know, once again, you need to vote to make sure that the fascists don't get into power. But you know, the ending is a little bit too tied up with a nice little bow. However, apart from that, this story is very, very politically charged. I saw somebody in the chat mention Orange Man bad, and Orange Man is indeed bad, and Orange Man here is played by Jane Asher as Bellatrix Vega, who, what you need to kind of realise, this is sort of like your blue pill moment, or red pill, I don't know, I've not watched The Matrix for ages, your red pill moment for political knowledge is that there are people in politics who are bad, who know that they're lying, and they know that they're bad. And you kind of need to accept that if you're going to understand that civility politics is kind of bullshit. And Run by Robert Valentine fully acknowledges and accepts this, which makes this, by proxy, one of the most politically charged and radical Doctor Who stories that I've heard in quite a long time. When it gets to the Ninth Doctor being in a room with Bellatrix Vega, and she's essentially spelling out her plan and her motive, and the fact that she is relishing in her political practices, I was kind of astounded when listening to this, because, yeah, they are saying the quiet parts out loud, but that is just the 21st century world that we live in here. And when you've got Alpha Centauri, who is this sort of like meek but well-meaning, marginalized hexapod character, who, one of the reasons they got into the Galactic Federation is so that they can enshrine into law protections for marginalized groups, and the fact that in Peladon Alpha Centauri is explicitly non-binary coded. If you've listened to that box set as well, you can see that there's a lot of social topics aligning here. There's a lot on its mind. When you put, you've got this marginalized rookie upstart politician going up against a well-established and well-connected and wealthy fascist. That's kind of the actual political dynamic in the real world right now. And to see that mirrored in Doctor Who was a little bit scary, in a good way. This was a really engaging listen. I think Eccleston thrived with the material. The banter between the Ninth Doctor and Alpha Centauri was inspired at points. There's also a really great homage to the film Mr. Smith Goes to Washington, where Alpha Centauri has to filibuster in order to buy time for the Ninth Doctor and the Ice Warrior Zargol to do some behind-the-scenes shenanigans, but Alpha Centauri is not a good public speaker, which was just a really funny setup for a joke. This was really good. I thought this was the highlight of the box set, pretty unambiguously. I don't know if it's worth picking up the box set on its own just to listen to, but if you like your political thrillers, if you like your homages to 1950s and 1960s political stories like Mr. Smith Goes to Washington, and if you like seeing, Orange Man bad reflected back at you in your Doctor Who, this is the story for you. Run was really, really good. Robert Valentine is clearly a very, very smart guy. Like I said, it was just a case of the premise of what he wanted to say butting heads with the neoliberal established rules of the Doctor Who universe about the Galactic Federation. There is no way that the story can set itself up the way that it does for it to tie up quite as neatly as it does in the end. It's very optimistic. A little bit too optimistic for its own good. But, you gotta travel in hope. Haha. Honestly, in terms of a box set overall, Run is really strong, but I actually think that this is probably the weakest of all of the box sets so far. This is the one where I can say that unless you are a Ninth Doctor completionist, this might actually be a pretty safe skip, all things considered. These box sets aren't cheap. They release a lot of them. If you had to, budget or, account for missing a few down the line, I think this is the one that you put at the bottom of the list. It's got merit. Like I said, the beginning of Below There is really strong. I like Lauren Mooney and Stuart Pringle a lot. And Run is also really good as well. But I think that the shortcomings kind of overwhelm the box set overall. It's quite disappointing, unfortunately. If you needed to budget for like Christopher Eccleston Big Finish stories, I'd say maybe wait another month or two for his upcoming Once and Future story, apparently with David Warner as the Unbound Doctor, because that would be a sight to behold. That would definitely be something worth listening to. But for now, I think that Travel in Hope is a bit of a safe skip. I think that the issue here now, especially with Travel in Hope, is that we have officially kind of exhausted the current format, the current structure of these Ninth Doctor box sets, where it's the Ninth Doctor travelling alone, meeting a companion surrogate. Every box set, there's also a recurring element from the classic series, whether it be the Ice Warriors or the Vashta Nerada from the revived series, or the Sea Devils, the Sontarans, Cybermen, the Brigadier, etc., etc. I think it's kind of exhausted the formula now, and we kind of need some sort of format change now for the Ninth Doctor, which might be a bit tough because we are currently halfway through the third season. I don't think we're going to be getting any changes for this production run, but I think that now we really do need a mix up to the formula, either much lengthier stories where we're able to like meet a full-blown supporting cast of characters that we can get attached to over like a 3-hour box set, or a 4-hour one similar to Diary of a River Song Friend of the Family, which is my favourite Big Finish release of this year so far, unambiguously. Or we actually give the Ninth Doctor a companion post Rose, like maybe he drops Rose off at the Powell estate for like a couple of weeks, and then a companion is thrust upon him for whatever reason. He doesn't recruit a companion, someone is thrust upon him for whatever reason. I think that's the happy medium to continuing the Ninth Doctor adventures through Big Finish, continuing to have Christopher Eccleston reprise this role, but not undercut what happens in Series 1.